Twice a month, Andrew Perron made the same cold calculation. He drove himself, no driver, no assistant, from his downtown high-rise to whatever piece of undervalued property his acquisition team had flagged. He needed these site visits to stay sharp, away from the sanitized presentations and architect renderings that dominated his days at Perron Development Group, the real estate empire he'd built on the ruins of small neighborhoods and forgotten histories. At 39, Andrew had transformed that ruthless vision into something far beyond simple wealth. His company had reshaped the skyline of 3 major cities and made Andrew one of the most feared dealmakers in commercial real estate. Business Insider estimated his net worth at $3.2 billion. But on this October morning, as amber light filtered through the wrought iron gates of Riverside Memorial Cemetery, none of that calculation mattered. He was here to close the deal that would cement his legacy, 22 acres of wasted space that would become the crown jewel of his portfolio, the Perron Towers. Andrew stepped out of his black Mercedes, Italian leather shoes crunching on the gravel path. He'd brought the surveyor's report, the zoning variance documents, and the purchase agreement that would erase this place from existence. Prime location, he muttered to himself, scanning the rows of weathered headstones. 2 blocks from the financial district. The city council's already approved the demolition permit. 6 months, and this becomes something that actually generates value. He walked deeper into the cemetery, mentally bulldozing everything he saw. That's when he stopped calculating. That's when the numbers died in his throat. 3 small figures lay huddled together on the cold ground. Andrew's breath caught. They were children, identical triplets, he realized, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with matted blonde hair that spread across the dirt like tangled roots. They wore hooded sweatshirts, one teal, one charcoal, one maroon, all torn and stained beyond recognition. Their clothes hung loose on their small frames, too thin for the autumn chill, and their faces, even in sleep, carried a weariness that didn't belong to childhood. They had no blankets, no shelter, just each other and the grave beneath them. Andrew moved closer, his shadow falling across them. That's when he saw the headstone they were protecting with their bodies. Christina Huff, 1989 to 2023. Beloved mother. She fought alone. The clipboard fell from Andrew's hands. Christina. The name hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. His vision blurred as 15 years collapsed into this single moment. Christina Huff. The woman who'd loved him when he was nobody, when he was just a kid with a business degree and a feverish obsession to prove he was more than his working-class roots. The woman he'd abandoned the moment his first development deal closed, because she wanted a life, and he wanted an empire. No, Andrew whispered, his knees buckling. He sank to the ground beside the sleeping girls, his expensive suit forgotten in the dirt. Christina, no, no, no. His hands trembled as he reached toward the headstone, fingers tracing the carved letters. 2023. She died this year. Recently. And he'd never known. He'd been too busy acquiring properties, too consumed with expansion strategies, too insulated in his world of wealth to even hear her name again. The tears came then, hot, choking sobs that shook his entire body. The king of real estate, the man who'd never shown weakness in a negotiation, was crying in a cemetery he'd planned to destroy, over a woman he'd thrown away like she was worth less than square footage. One of the girls stirred, the one in the teal hoodie. Her eyes flickered open, pale blue, haunted eyes that seemed far too old, and she stared at Andrew with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She didn't move away. She just watched him cry. I'm sorry, Andrew choked out, barely able to speak. I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were here. Are you okay? Where are your parents? The girl sat up slowly, careful not to wake her sisters. She looked at Andrew, then at the headstone, then back at Andrew. When she spoke, her voice was small but steady. This is our mama. We live here now. We don't got anywhere else to go. Andrew's heart shattered. He looked at the other 2 girls, still sleeping with their arms wrapped around each other for warmth. Then back at the one speaking. Then at the name on the grave. Your mama. Christina Huff was your mother. The girl nodded. She told us about you. Before she got sick. She said if we ever saw a man with fancy clothes crying at graves, we should tell him. She paused, her small face scrunching up as she tried to remember. Tell him that some things you can't buy back. Andrew felt the world tilt. How old are you? We're 8. We're triplets. I'm Lily. That's Rose. That's Iris. She pointed to each sleeping sister. Mama named us after flowers 'cause she said even in dirt, beautiful things can grow. 8 years old. Andrew's mind raced backward through time. 9 years ago, the last time he'd seen Christina. The night she'd told him she wanted more than late-night calls and canceled plans. The night he'd chosen a contract signing over her birthday dinner. The night she'd said, I can't compete with your ambition, Andrew. I hope it keeps you warm. He'd never called her back. And now, are you? Andrew's voice cracked. Are you girls alone? Where have you been living? Lily gestured to the grave beneath them. Here. Mama died 2 months ago. The hospital people said we'd get split up if we told anyone, sent to different houses. We promised Mama we'd stay together no matter what. So we stay here. She's here, and we're together. The other 2 girls were waking now, sitting up and staring at Andrew with identical wary expressions. Rose, in the charcoal hoodie, pulled Iris closer protectively. Who is he, Lily? I think, Lily said softly, still watching Andrew's face. I think he's the man Mama used to cry about. The one who builds the tall buildings. Andrew couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. His daughters. These were his daughters. Sleeping in a cemetery because he'd been too selfish, too driven, too hollow to be there for the woman who'd loved him. Christina had raised them alone, fought alone, died alone. While he'd been signing deals and collecting properties and congratulating himself on his empire. And now he'd come here to demolish the only home they had left. Iris, the smallest, spoke for the first time. Her voice was barely a whisper. Are you here to make us leave? The man with the papers said this place is getting torn down. But we don't got nowhere else to sleep that's safe. Andrew looked at his daughters, shivering in their torn hoodies, dirty and hungry, and clinging to each other over their mother's grave. He looked at the clipboard lying in the dirt beside him, the demolition order that would destroy this place in 6 months. Then Andrew Perron, billionaire, dealmaker, the man who measured everything in profit margins, made the first choice in 15 years that had nothing to do with money. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and with shaking hands, dialed his lead attorney. Michael, it's Andrew. The Riverside Cemetery project, kill it. Cancel everything. The land is off the table. I don't care what it costs us. He paused, his eyes never leaving the triplets. And send a car to my location. I need child protective services, a pediatrician, and... His voice broke. And 3 social workers. Immediately. I'm bringing 3 girls home. Lily tilted her head. What do you mean? Andrew wiped his eyes and looked at each of them. Lily, Rose, Iris. His daughters. Christina's daughters. The family he'd destroyed before it even had a chance to exist. I mean, he said, his voice raw but certain, you're not sleeping on the ground anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. Andrew Perron stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, 43 stories above the city, watching the sun set over a skyline he'd helped reshape. From this height, the people below were invisible, reduced to the crawl of traffic and the glow of streetlights beginning to flicker on. He liked it that way. Distance made everything cleaner, simpler. Up here, he didn't have to see the faces of the families displaced by his developments or hear the protests outside construction sites. Up here, it was just glass and steel and the quiet hum of success. His assistant had left hours ago, along with everyone else on the executive floor. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint buzz of his phone. Another email, another deal memo, another property flagged for acquisition. Andrew scrolled through without reading. The numbers had stopped meaning anything years ago. 3 billion. 5 billion. What difference did it make? The money just accumulated, like dust on the furniture in his empty mansion. He thought about going home, but couldn't summon the energy. Home was 22 rooms of imported marble and custom everything. All of it meticulously designed by the most expensive architects money could buy. And all of it empty. No wife. No children. No one to notice whether he came home at 8 or midnight or not at all. He'd had relationships over the years. Beautiful women who looked perfect at charity galas and never asked difficult questions, but they always ended the same way. They wanted time he didn't have. They wanted attention he couldn't give. They wanted a man, and all he'd ever been was a builder of empires. His father would have been disappointed. Andrew could still hear the old man's voice, thick with the accent of the factory floor where he'd worked for 30 years. Money's a tool, son, not a destination. You build things to make life better for people, not to prove you're better than people. But his father had died poor, worn out at 62, with nothing to show for his philosophy but a tiny apartment and a funeral Andrew had paid for with a single morning's interest from his investment accounts. Andrew had sworn he'd never end up like that. Invisible, forgotten, working until his body gave out for wages that barely covered rent. So he'd built and built and built, buying up neighborhoods his father's generation had called home, replacing their modest houses and corner stores with luxury condos that started at $2 million. He told himself it was progress, development, the natural order of capitalism. He told himself a lot of things in the dark. His phone buzzed again. The Riverside Cemetery project. His team had finally secured the last signature they needed from the city council. 22 acres of prime downtown real estate, currently wasted on the dead. In 6 months, it would be the Perron Towers, his masterpiece, his legacy, the crown jewel that would cement his name in the city's history. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he just felt tired. Andrew grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. He'd drive out to Riverside tomorrow morning, walk the property one last time before the demolition crews arrived. It was what he always did before a major project. A final survey, a last calculation. He never expected it would be the day everything he'd built would come crashing down. The morning air bit at Andrew's face as he stepped out of his Mercedes, the cemetery gates creaking in the October wind. He'd arrived early, before the surveying crew, wanting this moment alone with the property. 22 acres of marble and memories, all of it about to become foundation and steel. He walked the gravel paths with his phone in hand, snapping photos for the final presentation to the board, already composing the pitch in his head. Prime location, minimal relocation costs, projected ROI of 43% over 5 years. Then he saw them. 3 small shapes huddled together near the center of the grounds, so still he almost mistook them for part of the landscape. Andrew's steps slowed. As he drew closer, his breath caught. Children. 3 little girls, curled against each other on the bare ground beside a headstone, their bodies forming a protective circle around the grave itself. They were identical. Triplets, he realized with a jolt, maybe 7 or 8 years old, though it was hard to tell through the grime and exhaustion etched into their small faces. Their blonde hair hung in matted tangles past their shoulders, streaked with dirt and leaves. They wore hooded sweatshirts that had long ago lost any claim to warmth or dignity. One teal, one charcoal, one maroon, each riddled with holes and stains that spoke of months, maybe longer, without proper shelter. The fabric hung loose on their thin frames, and their exposed hands were red and raw from the cold. But it was their faces that stopped Andrew cold. Even in sleep, they looked haunted. Smudges of dirt marked their cheeks, and their lips were chapped and pale. These weren't children playing some morbid game. They were surviving, living here, in his cemetery, on his property. Andrew's shadow fell across them as he moved closer, and the girl in the teal hoodie stirred. Her eyes flickered open, pale blue, startlingly bright against the dirt on her face, and she stared up at him without fear, only a weary resignation that no child should possess. "I'm sorry," Andrew said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I didn't mean to wake you. Do you need help? Where are your parents?" The girl sat up slowly, and her movement woke the others. 3 pairs of identical blue eyes fixed on him now, assessing, calculating whether he was a threat. The one in teal glanced at her sisters, then back at Andrew, her gaze dropping to his expensive suit, his leather shoes, the Mercedes gleaming in the morning light behind him. "You're here for the property," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was small but steady, aged beyond her years. You're the man who's going to tear this place down. Andrew felt his throat tighten. How do you know that? We heard the workers talking last week. They said a rich man bought the cemetery. Said we'd have to leave soon. The girl's hand reached out to touch the headstone beside them, a gesture so protective it made Andrew's chest ache. This is our mama, Christina Huff. We live here now. We don't got nowhere else. The name hit Andrew like a physical blow. Christina. The world tilted, and he stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. No, it couldn't be. Christina Huff. The woman he'd loved and abandoned. The woman who'd wanted a life while he'd wanted an empire. Christina, he whispered, dropping to his knees in the dirt, his expensive suit forgotten. No, no, no. The girl in the charcoal hoodie spoke now, her voice quieter than her sister's. You knew our mama? Andrew couldn't answer. He was staring at the headstone, at the dates carved into the granite. 1989 to 2023, she died this year. Recently. And he'd never known. His hands were shaking as he reached toward the stone, fingers tracing the letters of her name. She told us about you. The third girl said, the one in maroon. Before she got sick. She said if we ever saw a man in fancy clothes crying at graves, we should tell him something. Andrew looked up, tears streaming down his face. Tell him what? The girl in teal met his eyes. That's some things you can't buy back. Andrew couldn't move. He knelt there in the dirt, his vision blurred with tears, staring at the name that had haunted him for 15 years. Christina Huff. The woman who'd seen something in him beyond ambition, beyond the hunger to prove himself. The woman he'd thrown away like she was worth less than a contract signing. How long have you been living here? He finally managed, his voice breaking. The girl in teal glanced at her sisters before answering. 2 months. Since Mama died. The hospital people said we'd get split up if we told anyone. Foster care. Different houses. Her small hand tightened on the headstone. We promised Mama we'd stay together no matter what. So we stay here. She's here, and we're together. Andrew felt something crack open inside his chest. You've been sleeping outside? For 2 months? Where do you eat? How do you? He couldn't finish. The questions felt obscene in the face of what these children had endured. There's a soup kitchen 3 blocks that way, the girl in charcoal said, pointing. They give us food in the evenings. And sometimes the church ladies bring sandwiches on Sundays. We manage. We're good at being invisible, the one in maroon added softly. Mama taught us how. She said the world doesn't like to see people who need help, so we learned how to disappear. The words cut through Andrew like a blade. Christina had taught them survival skills for homelessness while he'd been closing deals and expanding his empire. She'd been fighting alone, preparing her daughters for a world that would look away from their suffering, and he'd never known, never asked, never cared enough to find out what happened to the woman who'd loved him when he was nobody. Your mama, Andrew said, his throat tight. Tell me about her. Please. The girl in teal studied his face, as if trying to decide whether he deserved to know. Finally, she spoke. Mama was a teacher. Before we were born, she taught little kids how to read. But then she got pregnant with us, and the school said she couldn't work there anymore because she wasn't married. She tried to find other jobs, but nobody wants to hire a woman with triplet babies and no husband. She did her best, the one in charcoal said defensively, as if Andrew had accused Christina of something. She worked cleaning offices at night, brought us with her because she couldn't afford childcare. But then she got sick. Something in her head, she said, made her too sad to get out of bed some days. She lost the job. We lost our apartment. Andrew closed his eyes. Depression. Christina had been fighting depression while raising 3 children alone, while struggling to survive, while he'd been buying buildings and congratulating himself on his success. The math was inescapable. 9 years ago, he'd walked away from Christina. 8 years ago, she'd given birth to triplets. His triplets. Daughters he'd never known existed because he'd made himself unreachable, untraceable, too important to be bothered with the past. We ended up in the park for a while. The girl in teal continued. Mama tried to keep us safe, but it was hard. We were hungry all the time. Cold. Scared. And then, she paused, her eyes filling with tears. And then Mama got sicker. The hospital said it was cancer. Said she needed treatment we couldn't pay for. She fought for 2 years, worked every job she could find, but the cancer won. The girl in maroon reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out something small and silver, a locket, tarnished and dented. Mama said to keep this. Said if anything happened to her, this would prove who we belonged to. She held it out to Andrew with a trembling hand. He took it, his fingers numb, and opened the clasp. Inside was a photograph, faded and creased. A young man and woman, barely more than kids themselves, smiling at the camera. The man had his arm around the woman's shoulders, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Andrew stared at his own face, 15 years younger, before the money and the power and the emptiness. Before he'd learned to see people as obstacles or opportunities. When he'd still known how to love someone. The girl in teal spoke quietly. Mama said that was you. Said you were the only man who ever made her feel like she mattered. But then you forgot her. Andrew's hands shook as he held the locket, staring at the ghost of who he'd been. The man in that photograph would never have let Christina struggle alone. That man would have fought for her, protected her, been there when she needed him most. But that man had died somewhere along the way, buried under quarterly projections and acquisition targets, replaced by something cold and efficient that barely qualified as human. I didn't forget her, Andrew whispered, though the words felt like lies even as he spoke them. I made choices. Wrong choices. I thought building an empire was more important than, he couldn't finish. More important than what? Than love? Than family? Than the woman carrying his children? The girl in teal watched him with those impossibly old eyes. Mama said you were chasing something you'd never catch. She said some people spend their whole lives running from being poor, and they forget how to stop running even after they're rich. Andrew flinched. Christina had understood him better than he'd understood himself. She'd seen the fear that drove him, the desperation to never be powerless or invisible or forgotten like his father had been. And she'd known, even then, that his hunger would consume everything else, including her. What are your names? Andrew asked, his voice raw. He needed to know. Needed to call these girls, his daughters, something other than the colors of their torn hoodies. I'm Lily, the one in teal said. That's Rose. She nodded to the girl in charcoal. And that's Iris. Mama named us after flowers. She said even in dirt, beautiful things can grow. She said we were her beautiful things. Lily, Rose, Iris. Andrew repeated the names in his mind, trying to memorize them, trying to make them real. His daughters, 8 years old and sleeping in a cemetery because he'd abandoned their mother. Because he'd been too consumed with proving his worth to see the lives he was leaving behind. Where were you before this? Andrew gestured to the grave, to the makeshift shelter they'd created for themselves. After your mother died, what happened? The three girls exchanged glances, that silent communication that seemed to pass between them without words. Rose, the one in charcoal, spoke up. The hospital called someone. Social services. They took us to a place, a big house with lots of kids. A foster home. It wasn't bad, Iris added quickly, as if defending the memory. The lady who ran it was nice. Mrs. Patterson. She gave us clean clothes and warm beds. But we heard her talking on the phone, Lily finished. She was trying to find someone to adopt us. And everyone kept saying the same thing. 3 kids is too many. Triplets are too much work. Too expensive. They all wanted one of us, maybe 2. But nobody wanted all 3. Andrew's chest tightened. What did you do? We ran, Rose said simply. Mrs. Patterson was good to us, but we knew what was coming. They were going to separate us. Send us to different homes, different families. We promised Mama we'd stay together. So one night, we just left. Came here. At least here, we're together. At least here, we're with Mama. Andrew looked at these 3 small girls, identical in every way except the colors they wore, huddled together against a world that saw them as a problem to be solved rather than children to be loved. They'd chosen homelessness over separation, chosen cold nights and hunger over the risk of losing each other. They were 8 years old, and they'd already learned that the world's mercy had limits. How long ago did you leave the foster home? Andrew asked. 6 weeks, maybe, Lily said. We lost track of the days. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of sleeping on the ground, scavenging for food, hiding from anyone who might report them to authorities. 6 weeks of protecting each other and their mother's grave. And in that same 6 weeks, Andrew had closed 3 deals worth a combined $90 million. He'd celebrated with champagne in boardrooms while his daughters slept in a cemetery. "You can't stay here," Andrew said, and immediately saw fear flash across their faces. He held up his hands. "No, I don't mean. I'm not going to separate you. I'm not going to let anyone take you away from each other. But you can't sleep outside anymore. It's not safe. You're just children. We're not going back to foster care," Rose said, her voice hardening with defiance. "They'll split us up." "I know," Andrew said. "I know they will. But there's another option. A better option." He took a shaky breath, his mind racing through logistics and legalities and 1,000 complications. None of it mattered. These were his daughters. Christina's daughters. And he'd failed them once already by not being there. He wouldn't fail them again. Andrew pulled out his phone, his hands still trembling. "I need to make some calls. Get some people here who can help. A doctor first. You girls need to be checked out. Make sure you're okay. And then—" "We're not sick," Lily interrupted, her voice sharp with suspicion. "And we're not going anywhere without each other. We promised." "I know," Andrew said. "I heard you. All 3 of you, together. I promise." The word felt strange in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd promised anyone anything that wasn't legally binding. But looking at these 3 girls, his daughters, he meant it with every fractured piece of his heart. Rose studied him with those haunting blue eyes. "Mama said you were good at promises when they helped you. She said you kept every business promise you ever made. But you broke all the personal ones." The words landed like a punch. Andrew had no defense. Christina had been right. He'd built an empire on his reputation for reliability, for always delivering on contracts, for never backing out of a deal. But he'd walked away from her without a second thought. He'd broken the only promise that had ever really mattered. "Your mother was right about a lot of things," Andrew said quietly. "She was right about me. About what I'd become." He looked down at the locket still clutched in his hand, at the young man who'd loved a woman more than he loved ambition. "But I'm asking you to let me try to be better. To be the man in that picture again. The one your mother deserved." Iris, who'd been silent through most of the conversation, spoke up for the first time. Her voice was so soft Andrew had to lean closer to hear. "Mama used to talk to you. At night, when she thought we were sleeping. She'd look at that picture and tell you things. About us. About how scared she was. About how much it hurt that you never came looking." Andrew felt tears streaming down his face again. He didn't try to stop them. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I let her struggle alone. I'm sorry you had to grow up without," his voice cracked, "without a father who gave a damn." "Are you our father?" Lily asked. The question hung in the cold October air, direct and unflinching. Andrew met her eyes. "Yes. I didn't know about you until 5 minutes ago, but yes. You're my daughters. Christina was. She was the only woman I ever loved. And I was too stupid and too selfish to realize it until it was too late." The 3 girls looked at each other in that silent way they had, having an entire conversation without words. Finally, Lily turned back to Andrew. "If you're our father, then why did you come here? To the cemetery? Were you looking for us?" Andrew's stomach twisted with shame. "No. I came here to walk the property one last time. I bought this cemetery. I was planning to demolish it. Build luxury towers. The Perron Towers. My legacy project." He gestured to the surveying equipment still sitting by his car. "I was going to erase all of this, including your mother's grave. I didn't know you were here. I didn't know she was here. I didn't know any of it." Rose's face hardened. "So you were going to destroy Mama. Even after she was dead, you were still taking things from her." The accusation was devastating in its accuracy. "Yes," Andrew said, because there was no other honest answer. "I was. But I'm not anymore. The project is canceled. This cemetery isn't going anywhere. Your mother's grave is safe. You're safe." Lily tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "Why? Why would you give up all that money for people you just met?" "Because you're not people I just met," Andrew said. "You're my daughters. And your mother," his voice broke again. Your mother deserved better than what I gave her. She deserved a partner who showed up, who fought for her, who saw her as more important than the next deal. I can't give her that now, but I can give you what she wanted. A home, a family, someone who chooses you over everything else. Mama said you didn't know how to choose people, Iris said softly. She said you only knew how to choose success. She was right, Andrew admitted. But maybe, he looked at these three small girls in their torn hoodies, these daughters who'd survived on loyalty and love while he'd built towers of glass and steel. Maybe it's not too late to learn. Andrew made the calls right there, kneeling in the dirt beside Christina's grave while his daughters watched with wary hope. First his attorney, canceling the Riverside project with instructions to bury any legal challenges. Then his assistant, with orders to clear his schedule indefinitely. And finally, Child Protective Services, his voice steady as he explained the situation. 3 homeless minors living in a cemetery. And yes, he was related. And no, he wouldn't let them be separated. The social worker arrived within the hour, a tired-looking woman named Ms. Rodriguez, who'd clearly seen too much suffering in her career. She examined the girls with practiced efficiency, asking gentle questions while documenting their condition on a tablet. Andrew stood back, letting her work, but he never took his eyes off Lily, Rose, and Iris. His daughters. The words still felt surreal. Mr. Perron, Ms. Rodriguez said finally, gesturing for him to step aside. The girls are malnourished and dehydrated, but otherwise physically stable. However, they're documented runaways from the Patterson foster home. Protocol requires I return them to state custody immediately. No. The word came out harder than Andrew intended. They ran because the system was going to separate them. I won't let that happen. Ms. Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. I understand your concern, Mr. Perron. And if you're truly their biological father, there may be options. But that requires DNA testing, legal proceedings, home studies. It could take months. In the meantime, these children need immediate care. Then they'll come home with me. Today. Now. Andrew pulled out his phone again. I'll hire the best family law attorney in the state. We'll fast-track whatever needs to be fast-tracked. But those girls are not going back into a system that sees them as a problem to be divided and distributed. It's not that simple. It is that simple, Andrew interrupted, his voice low and fierce. I'm their father. I have the resources to provide for them. And I'm telling you right now, if you try to take them away from each other, you'll have a legal fight that'll make your department's life hell for years. Or you can work with me, and we can do what's actually best for these children. Ms. Rodriguez studied him for a long moment. Andrew had used that tone in countless negotiations, the voice that made it clear he would burn everything down before he'd accept defeat. But this time, it wasn't about winning. It was about 3 little girls who'd already lost too much. The Patterson foster home would need to agree, Ms. Rodriguez said slowly. And you'd need to pass an emergency home inspection today. The girls would be in your custody temporarily, pending full evaluation. Make it happen. 2 hours later, Andrew stood in the modest living room of Eleanor Patterson's foster home, a well-maintained house in a working-class neighborhood that reminded him uncomfortably of where he'd grown up. Mrs. Patterson was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and capable hands, and she'd hugged each of the triplets tightly when they walked through her door. I've been so worried, she said, her voice thick with emotion. When I woke up and found you girls gone, I thought. She couldn't finish. You should have told me you were scared. We could have figured something out. You were trying to find someone to adopt us? Lily said quietly. But nobody wanted all 3. Mrs. Patterson's face crumpled. Oh, sweetheart. I was trying to find you a family. The right family. I would never have let them separate you without exhausting every option first. Andrew felt a fresh wave of shame. These girls had been so traumatized by loss that they'd assumed the worst, assumed that the world would tear them apart just like it had torn them away from their mother. They'd run into the cold rather than risk being split up. And he, their father, had been completely oblivious to their existence. Mrs. Patterson, Andrew said, I'm Andrew Perron. I'm the girl's biological father. I didn't know they existed until this morning. I'm asking for the chance to take them home, to give them a permanent family. Together. Mrs. Patterson looked at him carefully, taking in his expensive suit still stained with cemetery dirt, the desperation barely concealed beneath his businessman's facade. Mr. Perron, these girls have been through tremendous trauma. They need stability, consistency, love. Not just money. Can you give them that? Andrew thought about his empty mansion, the 22 rooms he wandered through alone. He thought about the office he practically lived in, the deals he'd prioritized over every human connection. He thought about Christina, raising 3 daughters alone while he built an empire that meant nothing. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't know how to be a father. I've spent 15 years learning how to acquire properties and maximize profits. But I know how to learn. I know how to commit. And I know these girls deserve better than what they've had. Better than what I gave their mother. His voice cracked. Let me try? Please. Mrs. Patterson invited Andrew to sit while she made tea, a gesture that felt both hospitable and like a test. The triplets had disappeared upstairs to wash up, and Andrew could hear water running through old pipes, the creak of floorboards above his head. Normal sounds. Home sounds. Things his sterile mansion had never produced. They're remarkable girls, Mrs. Patterson said, setting a chipped mug in front of him. Smart, resilient, fiercely protective of each other. Lily's the natural leader, Rose is the thinker, and Iris. Iris feels everything so deeply it breaks your heart. Their mother did an extraordinary job with them, given the circumstances. Andrew's hands tightened around the mug. I should have been there. I should have. You can't change the past, Mr. Perron, Mrs. Patterson interrupted gently. Christina made choices too. She could have tried to find you, could have told you about the pregnancy. But from what the girls have shared, she wanted to protect them from a man who valued money over people. Was she right to make that choice? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Andrew wanted to protest, to defend himself, but what defense did he have? If Christina had shown up 15 years ago, pregnant and asking for help, would he have stepped up? Or would he have seen her as an obstacle to his ambitions, a complication to be managed with a check and a non-disclosure agreement? Yes, he said finally. She was right. I would have failed them then. I was too consumed with proving myself, with building something that mattered more than. He stopped, the words dying in his throat. More than what? More than love? More than family? There was nothing that mattered more than those things. He'd just been too blind to see it. Footsteps on the stairs announced the girls' return. They'd changed into clean clothes, mismatched donations from Mrs. Patterson's supply closet, and their faces were scrubbed pink. With the dirt washed away, Andrew could see Christina in their features. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their smiles, the way they moved in unconscious synchronization. His daughters, the proof of a love he'd thrown away. Mrs. Patterson gestured to the couch. Girls, Mr. Perron wants to talk to you about your future. I want you to listen carefully and think about what you really want. This is your decision too. The triplets sat together, Lily in the middle with her sisters pressed against her sides. 3 pairs of blue eyes fixed on Andrew with an intensity that made him feel exposed, judged, found wanting. He knelt down to their level, the way he'd seen fathers do in movies, though he had no real experience to draw from. I want to adopt you, Andrew said. Deciding directness was better than dancing around the truth. All 3 of you, together. I want to give you a home, a family, everything your mother wanted you to have. I know I haven't earned the right to be your father. I know I failed your mother in every way that mattered. But I'm asking for the chance to do better. To be better. Why? Rose asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. You didn't want us before. Mama said you made it clear you didn't want kids, didn't want anything that would slow you down. Why do you want us now? The question cut deep because it was fair. What had changed? Just this morning, Andrew had been calculating the square footage of this cemetery, planning to erase it from existence. Just this morning, he'd been the same man who'd walked away from Christina without looking back. What made him different now? Because I saw you, Andrew said quietly. Because for the first time in 15 years, I actually saw people instead of property. You were sleeping on your mother's grave in torn clothes, and you'd chosen that, chosen cold and hunger and danger, because staying together mattered more than comfort or safety. You loved each other more than you feared the world. His voice cracked. I've spent my whole adult life afraid. Afraid of being poor, being powerless, being invisible like my father. And that fear made me cruel, made me blind. But you three, you're not afraid of anything except losing each other. We're afraid of lots of things, Iris whispered. We're just more afraid of being alone. Andrew nodded. Then let me promise you this. If you give me the chance to be your father, you'll never be alone. Not one of you. I'll be there for school plays and scraped knees and bad dreams. I'll learn how to braid hair and make pancakes and whatever else fathers are supposed to do. And I will never, ever choose a business deal over you. Not once. Not ever. Lily's eyes narrowed. Mama made promises too. She promised she wouldn't leave us. But she got sick and died anyway. How do we know you won't leave? You don't, Andrew admitted. I can't promise I'll live forever. But I can promise I'll never leave on purpose. I'll never walk away because something else matters more. You'll always be the most important thing. The three girls looked at each other in that wordless way, having a conversation Andrew couldn't hear but could feel in the weight of the silence. Finally, Lily turned back to him, her small face serious beyond her years. We need rules, she said. If you're going to be our dad, there have to be rules. Andrew blinked, surprised. Of course. Whatever you need. You can't make us call you dad until we're ready, Rose said firmly. Maybe we'll wanna, maybe we won't. But we get to decide. Agreed. And you have to keep Mama's grave safe, Iris added, her voice trembling slightly. We need to visit her. We need to talk to her, and bring her flowers, and tell her about our lives. You can't make us forget her. Andrew's throat tightened. I would never ask you to forget her. Your mother was. She was the best person I ever knew. We'll visit her grave as often as you want. Every day if that's what you need. Lily studied him for another long moment, then said the words that broke him completely. And you can't leave on purpose. Not for business trips that are too long, not for meetings that matter more, not for anything. If you're going to be our dad, you have to actually be here. Mama left because she couldn't help it, but you can't leave because you choose to. The condition was a mirror held up to his entire adult life. Every canceled dinner, every missed call, every relationship he'd sacrificed at the altar of professional success. Christina had asked him for the same thing 15 years ago. Just be present. Just show up. Just choose me sometimes. And he'd failed. He'd always had one more deal to close, one more property to acquire, one more meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. But looking at these three little girls, their mother's daughters, who'd survived homelessness and hunger rather than be separated, Andrew felt something shift inside him. The fear that had driven him for so long, the desperate need to prove he was more than his working-class origins, suddenly seemed so small compared to what he was being offered. A family, a chance to matter to someone for reasons that had nothing to do with his bank account. I promise, Andrew said, and he meant it with a certainty he'd never felt in any boardroom. I'll be here, every day, for every important moment and every ordinary one. You'll get sick of seeing me, I guarantee it. Rose's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. We won't get sick of you. We're used to being together all the time. Then you'll have to get used to one more person, Andrew said. Because I'm not going anywhere. Lily exchanged one more look with her sisters, then gave a small nod. Okay, you can try to be our dad. But if you mess up, if you choose work over us even once, we're done. We'll run again, and you won't find us. The threat should have been absurd. 3 8-year-old girls threatening a billionaire, but Andrew took it with the seriousness it deserved. They'd already proven they were survivors, that they'd sacrificed comfort for principle. They meant every word. I understand, Andrew said. And I won't mess up. Not with this. This is the only deal that matters anymore. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been watching silently from the kitchen doorway, cleared her throat. Then we have a lot of work to do. Mr. Perron, you'll need to undergo background checks, home studies, parenting classes. The state doesn't just hand children over, even to biological parents. This could take months. I'll do whatever it takes, Andrew said, standing. He looked at the triplets, still huddled together on the couch. Would it be okay if I visited you here? While we wait for the legal process. I want to get to know you. I want you to get to know me. The girls looked at Mrs. Patterson, who smiled warmly. You're welcome here anytime, Mr. Perron. These girls need all the family they can get. Iris, the quietest of the three, spoke up suddenly. Can we still go to Mama's grave? Even while we're here? Of course, Mrs. Patterson said. And Mr. Perron can take you, if you'd like. I'd like that very much, Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion. I'd like to visit your mother too. To tell her. He stopped, unable to continue. To tell her you're sorry? Lily asked, not unkindly. Yes, Andrew whispered. To tell her I'm sorry. And to promise her that I'll take care of you. That I'll be the father I should have been from the beginning. The 8 months that followed became Andrew's real education. The background checks were invasive but necessary, digging into every corner of his life, while he sat for interviews with social workers who asked pointed questions about his capacity for emotional availability. The home studies meant strangers walking through his mansion, noting the cold emptiness of rooms that had never heard children's laughter, recommending modifications, safer staircases, softer corners, spaces designed for living rather than impressing. But the hardest part was learning to be present. Andrew started with small visits to Mrs. Patterson's home, awkward hours where he sat at the kitchen table with his daughters and tried to talk about things that weren't business. Lily tested him constantly, asking about his day and watching to see if he'd check his phone. Rose asked impossible questions about Christina, forcing him to confront his failures directly. Iris just watched him with those sad blue eyes, waiting to see if he'd keep his promise. Slowly, painfully, Andrew learned. He learned that Lily liked her pancakes with chocolate chips, that Rose was brilliant at math but struggled with reading, that Iris had nightmares about her mother and needed someone to sit with her until she fell back asleep. He learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos at midnight in his office, practicing on rope until his fingers remembered the pattern. He learned that good night meant reading 3 stories, not 1, and that the girls had a specific order they had to be tucked in. His professional life fractured under the weight of his new priorities. Andrew started leaving the office at 5 o'clock sharp, no matter what meeting was scheduled, what deal was pending. He took weekends off entirely, spending Saturdays at the park with his daughters and Sundays at Christina's grave, where he'd kneel beside them and add his own flowers to theirs. His executive team thought he'd lost his mind. His board of directors called emergency meetings to discuss his concerning behavioral changes. Andrew stopped caring what they thought. He'd spent 15 years building an empire that impressed everyone and meant nothing. Now he was building something that actually mattered, a family, a home, a reason to exist beyond the next acquisition. His father would have understood. His father, who'd worked himself to death for wages that barely covered rent, had known something Andrew was only now learning. That wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the people who needed you and the promises you kept. The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday in July, in a courthouse that smelled like old wood and possibility. Judge Reeves signed the papers with a smile that suggested she'd seen too many failures and was grateful to witness a success. Andrew stood before her with Lily, Rose, and Iris on either side, their hands gripping his with a fierceness that still surprised him. Mr. Perron, the judge said, do you understand that adoption is permanent? That these children will be your legal daughters with all the rights and responsibilities that entails? I understand, Your Honor, Andrew said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. And I'm ready. Then by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby grant this petition for adoption. Lily, Rose, and Iris Huff are now legally Lily, Rose, and Iris Perron. She looked at the girls with warm eyes. Congratulations, girls. You have a father. Lily looked up at Andrew, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. A real smile, tentative but genuine. Can we go tell Mama? That evening, they went to the cemetery together. Andrew's daughters, he still marveled at those words, brought flowers they'd grown themselves in the small garden they'd started at his house. Their house now. Lily carried roses, Rose carried lilies, and Iris carried irises, a tradition they'd established over the months of visits. Andrew brought chrysanthemums, Christina's favorites, the same flowers he'd once imagined bringing to a construction site. They knelt together at the grave, these 4 people who'd been strangers 8 months ago and were now family. The headstone looked different somehow, less lonely. Andrew had arranged for the area around it to be maintained in perpetuity, had established a fund to ensure Christina's resting place would never be neglected. "Hi, Mama," Lily said softly, placing her roses in the built-in vase. "We have good news. It's official now. We have a dad." "He kept his promise," Rose added, setting down her lilies. "He didn't leave. Not even once. He comes to all our school stuff and makes us breakfast and helps with homework even when he doesn't understand the math." Iris, always the most emotional, spoke through tears. "We miss you every day, Mama. But we're okay now. We're safe. You don't have to worry about us anymore." Andrew waited until his daughters had finished before speaking. His hands trembled as he placed the chrysanthemums beside their flowers. "Christina, I know I'm 15 years too late. I know sorry doesn't fix what I destroyed. But I want you to know," his voice cracked. "I want you to know I see them. I see our daughters. Every day I see them. Not as obligations or complications or obstacles to my ambitions. I see them as people, as your legacy, as the most important thing I'll ever be responsible for." Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It is crazier and more intriguing as you ever imagine. Do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen.